How are you all doing? Well, lockdown is going on. 3, 4 corners. I have stopped counting. The problem will be enormous. I mean, from starting from ordering stuff from Amazon to going back to work, I really don't know what to predict anymore. Nevertheless, what you see in front of me is my childhood sin. And whenever I come up on the terrace to have a glance, it kind of evokes very strong emotions in me. The railway track, these houses were not there. The hills, the kind of turned bluish in the afternoon. Why I'm referring to these things? I'm referring to because I am going to deal with a topic that is very sensitive and very misunderstood. The topic of emotions and how cognitive science can help us in understanding a little bit about them. So, what are emotions? And then what brain science tells us, and then what can we do in particularly these times. And many reports every day comes in media that people are losing their control. So emotion regulation has been a matter of great debate and research interest in many scientists. How to control emotions? What are the tricks, if at all? So these are some of the things I would like to deal with today. And I hope that if you have looked at one of my previous episodes on attention, it would be very helpful, because the connection between attention and emotion is very interesting. And it looks like that if you can have some control over your attention, then you might control your emotions as well. It seems interesting, but we will look at the research, however briefly it is. And I'm very much interested in this scene. And then the far blue hill there. And I remember, I would not say I was climbing that, but I was going pretty close to it. And there is a river, a coil that flows by it some other day. So let's get back to emotions. So emotions are basically subjective states, the way one feels. And therefore it is very difficult to actually express them in words. I mean, I would doubt that language really expresses emotions. Language has been kind of a transducer, but it doesn't really transduce a lot of things that goes subjectively. And we all are emotional. We have, I mean, the usual popular dichotomy is that you have a rational mind and you have an emotional mind or emotional heart. The studies of emotions were not very prominent during the Vivistic era, but then we have a shift in cognition, and people took up how to look at emotions. And the history of study of emotions in psychopathology and neurology is well known. Because once your emotional brain has some kind of problem, your rational brain simply might not work. It's very interesting to note that we don't have direct access to study emotions except via some other. So emotions are subjective states. They're part of our consciousness, the way one is and the way one feels, and they affect all kinds of things. That's why it's important even now, because we are bombarded with so much of uncertainty and difficult decisions that we really don't know how to react properly to emotions. So emotion regulation becomes very important. So emotions are basically these states that are not very well expressed often, but they kind of guide our behavior in most circumstances. And I would like to say that to the extent that if you have no control over emotions, then you are kind of uh, you might be in real problem. Uh, of course, you can go back to the Greeks on all matters, but I don't want to go there today. Let's restrict to certain philosophers or other people's ideas on emotions from 16th century onwards. Descartes, apart from him being some kind of a problematic individual when it came to more affective things, as you know, he wrote a book called The Passions of the Soul, and he was interested in types of emotions, intellectual emotions, and other forms of feelings. At the time, the word emotion was reduced rather passions. So a lot of people they wrote referring to passion, the individual way of reacting to how one feels. In that book, maybe he identified about 6 or 7 types of basic categories. And at the time, as you know, Spinoza was quite active in Netherlands, and in his ethics, I believe he also to about 40 types of affective states. Spinoza used the word affect. Today, of course, we might be, discussing and separating affect from emotions more scientifically, but at the time, they were experimenting with various words. We have Leibniz and many other people too that brought in words like sentiments and feelings, and many other philosophers of the time at the time in Britain. They took this. Hobbes particularly wrote, I believe, something on affective states. So more or less, everybody was keen to understand exactly minds and how we react to them and what they do to us. Uh, we can come back to say 19th century and we see a lot of activity in various fields. Most particularly, go back to Darwin. You all know that Darwin was famous for his evolutionary work on evolution, but many don't know that he wrote a very fantastic book in 1859 on emotions. Uh, it was called The Expression of Emotions in uh, Man and Animals. Then he wrote another book called Descent of Man. So Darwin was very interested in how people uh, identify emotions. And today we do this kind of experiments where we ask people to look at some pictures and emotions. And he believed that evolutions had a evolutionary purpose. They gave us adaptive control on our destinies. And there are many funny stories. Recently somebody has discovered, I believe, Peter Snyder, who has discovered his actual work on this emotion experiment, and he calls him, he was probably an experimental psychologist. So what was the experiment? He uh, got hold of some about 40 pictures from French uh, scientist who was experimenting on emotions called Duchenne. I don't know if I'm pronouncing well. Uh, Duchenne was very keen on emotions. What he was doing, he was putting some, he was passing electrical currents, and then he was seeing if people are, if the musculature is changing with regard to, and if that had a connection with emotions. And Darwin didn't. Darwin got out of pictures, and Darwin started experimenting with his guests. So he asked people to look at these pictures and uh, identify the emotions. He found out that only 5 or 6 are basic emotions that had a good amount of agreement. And this is very important. Even today, we go by uh, agreement in these kind of subjective ratings. So there you go with Darwin. So we have a history of studies on emotions, at least beginning with Darwin. And then Freud, obviously, keen on emotions, but Freud gave it a twist. He told that it's the unconscious is the collect where all your emotional states are collected, and if you cannot express, then you get into trouble. So Freud built a good amount of theory based on the links between conscious states and unconscious processes. And even today, we are in cognitive psychology, we are turning back to the unconscious. Then you have Jung, obviously, who was more interested in Carl Jung archetypes and collective unconscious and so on and so forth. I can't get into that. All I'm trying to say is that you can certainly rich psychological heritage on emotions. But then, when we are particularly talking about psychological theories, William James would be very important here. James uh, was interested in emotions, but I would say, he was a bit bizarre at the time, being a cognitivist. He paired up with somebody called Lang, and there is a famous theory. And he wanted to say that your emotions are basically nothing but physiological reactions, and how you react, how you emotionally react only after the physiology is active. So you some terrible thing and you are trembling, and you are feeling angry or you know whatever fearful. It's because of the uh, uh, physiological activity. So it was a physiological event that was provoking emotions. But today I don't think we would go by that, because today we are more interested in the cognitive consequences of how the cognition plays a key role in telling you how you can react to emotions. But this is not the case at the time, and maybe he was more inclined in grounding psychology to natural science. A lot of things can be said on that. So James was a early proponent. Then you have a long phase of break in psychology, animal studies, behaviorism, and nothing happens. I'm not quite sure today the foster children of the behaviorists who call themselves, I don't know, they still try to study emotions biochemically in rats or the animals, but that's up to them. So, nonetheless, uh, so very long history told you in 1 2 minutes, and you can go and check. Uh, Talking of emotional expressions, how the face expresses is a very important stuff. And I remember a very fascinating account of a German sculptor called Messerschmitt, and he was in Vienna. He was very crazy in some sense. He went down and created heads of that manifested bizarre emotions, and these are collected in museums now. I'm putting a clip here that you will see. He demonstrated about 60 various forms of expression. So one thing is coming very clearly: humans or the animals animals are capable of expressing emotions very distinctly, and we are even capable of identifying them very distinctly. But the question is how the brain controls all of it. So I'll tell you the brain and the cognition behind it. Uh, Today we are not bothered about the various types of facial emotions that people can make, but we're more interested in finding out whether your cognition kind of shapes your emotion. And within cognitive science, there has been a growing effort to find out cognitive roots of emotion regulation. So let's talk a bit about what are the cognitive systems that can influence emotions, most particularly attention. As you may know, cognitive psychologists are obsessed with attention. Is the holy grail. They would like to explain everything with attention. That's what, and working memory, cousin brother. So, what does attention do to your emotion? One of the claims is that if you can regulate your attention, then you can regulate your emotion. And there's an emotional stimuli or affective stimuli and attentional states. A lot of people have shown that happy, sad faces, these, that, they influence your attentional states. Or even you orient more towards certain kind of stimuli. You are struck with a sad face and you kind of are not struck with a happy face. You could say that this is evolutionary because if a person is sad, I would like to engage and find out more about the sadness. Uh, and viewers within attention, please check the earlier video on attention, have been involved in the study of emotion, particularly in the experimental setups. So most generally what we do is that we present some stimuli and ask people to either guess the emotion. We see what happens in brain imaging. The idea is that if you can disengage attention faster from a stimuli that is holding you and making you sad, then you can be fine. But that requires control. So you have attentional regulation affecting emotional states. What are the potential examples? Let's see, where I'm sitting now. This is, as I told you, this is my childhood place, and I am effectively inclined to certain things a certain way, appraise them a certain way, and feel about them a certain way. Suppose I remember all kind of things that happened, and I appraise them in a more negative context. Not negative, but in a more emotional context. My mood would shift. On the other hand, if I just look at the beauty and don't bring to my mind and regulate my attention to what I'm seeing and what I'm trying to get back, then my mood, emotional state will be different. So this is how your selective attention can influence how what kind of affective state you are into, and there is a good amount of literature supporting that. And you can see the clear deviation from the earlier theories where people are when mostly in the physiological nature of emotion or more neurological nature of emotion. But cognitive scientists are particularly interested in finding out if attention, perception, so they influence our emotional states. So if you can regulate your attention in some way, then you can be okay with your emotion. At least you would know more about emotion. Attention is of many types, as you may know, and there is something called affective attention, and we all have grown up with that. I mean, we attend to emotional stimuli depending on our own evolution in a certain way. I mean, some people they feel unhappy even with apparently happy happy pictures like in a museum, and some people show the uh, other way around emotion. So emotional experience and attentive states are not same for everyone. Individual differences there. Of course, the other more core component of attention are well understood, but we don't know much about the so-called affective attention and if it also has a defined neural network. Uh, there are two main networks in the brain, the dorsal and the ventral networks, and they are correlated with attentional networks. For example, in the parietal lobe, if you have an impairment, then you could have a problem with your attention, but your emotional responses could be okay with the same stimuli, and this is seen with patients with neglect. Very strangely, this they cannot attend, but they can unconsciously be responsive to emotional stimuli of certain type. So you have the affective attention that helps us in prioritizing stimuli of certain types. The prioritizing can happen in many ways. I mean, I'm not just saying it can happen in this or that way, but it can happen in many other ways. Uh, you would experience some audio problem because I'm with the wireless microphone and uh, my iPhone microphone. It takes a while to get to this stuff, but I'm not emotionally disturbed nevertheless. And there's even most and people are having their lockdown evenings around me. Uh, People are on the roofs. So the story is pretty long. A lot of people have been doing brain imaging studies, and many networks have been found. But most importantly, the dorsal and ventral networks, they do two different kind of things. One is giving you knowledge about where to attend. The other one is context. I mean, what are you getting when you are attending to it? So, amygdala, for example, which is well known for emotional functioning, has a good amount of interactions with the ventral network. The other thing in this connection is that affective attention to stimuli is also under the control of executive control system in the areas. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that if you can regulate somehow your executive functions, and then it can boil down to effective attention, and you can be fine. So the take-home message is that if you control your attention, work on your attention, and then you could be having a control on your emotional states. So this is a very nutshell a cognitive theory that's going around these days. I mean, I have come across many recent media reports in well-to-do journals. Everyone knows that people are having difficult time managing emotion. So they're turning into cognitive science, and people are writing reports. So you can reappraise the situation that we know it is uncertain, we know it is difficult, but you can't go harping on it. We just have to accept the new normal. And this can only happen if you play with your attention more differently. Uh, so emotion regulation is attention bound. So I think that we learned something about emotions and how they can be regulated. I want to make one or two last points. First is that the over amplification of attention's role, as we looked at with a bit of skepticism, because now we know a lot of evidence that so attention really uh, is limited in some sense because emotions belong to the subjective terrain, the phenomenological, and attention doesn't often penetrate or it's not necessary. And emotional stimuli has been shown to be influencing cognition when even you were not aware of them. So we have to take into account that debate. And secondly, the disconnection between full-blown consciousness, what I really know through attention, and things that are bombarding on my neural system, but I don't know about them, but they still influence my behavior. They are two distinctive mechanisms, and still we are trying to understand them. So we have to be a bit skeptical in assuming the absolute role of attention in emotion regulation. How to train, nevertheless, your emotion regulation? Many people are coming up with studies that show meditation can help because meditation trains attention. So that's the same logic. So attention can help you regulate emotional stuff. Or you might use some other attention enhancing programs. And please check one of my earlier videos on these kind of things. But it's a matter of trying and seeing what really works. It's not a recommendation for everyone, for all cultures, so on and so forth. Final part, To what extent the classical notions of cognitive psychology will hold on if social distancing is on, and a large-scale change in human behavior I can foresee. We will see, we'll wait and see. But till then, we need to be confidently using the notions that have guided us for many years now. So I hope that we have got something out of it and you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions and comments, let me know. And see you next week with something else. Thank you very much.